Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 25 during week 5, and I don't know, I found this week to be a bit of a letdown where, yes, there is some promising things happening from a game standpoint, but I feel like the game as a whole was largely disappointing this week, where it started off pretty interesting early in the week, but then sort of went downhill. Not to mention some other things we'll be getting into more in a moment, but whatever. Now, this is being recorded on Tuesday, September 5th, and as usual, this includes live feed spoilers, including veto results, so if you don't want to be spoiled, be sure to click out the video now. But with all that out of the way, there are 13 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 13, the person that I believe is the least likely to win Big Brother 25 right now is a bit of a weird case considering no one was actually evicted this past week, so we're going to jump straight to the person that is the most likely to be evicted on Thursday night, and here we have Jag. And I'm a bit disappointed by Jag, where first up it was looking very much like he was going to be evicted last week, where even though I said at the time of the video that Blue was seeming to be the target, the votes did shift back to Jag in time for the actual live show, and we even saw Matt telling Cirrie that he had won the power, which made it seem like he wasn't going to use it. However, after the feeds went down, we got to the live show, Matt did use the power, and after Jag was voted out 10-0, he was saved by the power, and it seemed like he was getting new life in the game, as we saw during the first night after the eviction, that he was starting to wake up a little bit. He was starting to recognize the power structure in the house. He was seeing pulling together the likes of Matt and Blue to potentially pull something together, and it seemed like Jag was finally going to wake up and start to actually play the game effectively, until he decides to go around interrogating people about the actual vote, which, to be fair, isn't the worst thing in the world, but considering the spot that he was in, where he had just been voted out, not to mention the fact that Jared was the HOH, he could have easily just sat back and let Cam and Red be the targets instead, where he could have used the mindset of wanting to take a shot at the power structure in order to lay groundwork more so than actually going around and making it seem like he didn't trust these people. But because he was doing that so much, that caused the target to shift to him, where admittedly he does get a bit of an unlucky veto result with Cam winning the veto, where Cam was the initial target, which sort of made him sort of one of the main targets moving forward. And yes, while there was a serious movement to backdoor America, it seemed like Jag's own actions resulted in him being the target instead, and at this point it does seem like he's going to be voted out. And I feel like a lot of my disappointment from this week comes from Jag's own gameplay, where even though he was starting to question things a bit, by Saturday he was pretty much coming back to the Cirrie side, where he even went so far as to make an alliance with Cirrie and Red, which is pretty insane. Not to mention the fact that he was just apologizing for stuff when the Cirrie side was very clearly gaslighting him over this whole situation, making it seem like it was his fault that he was being targeted, even though he was trying to gather information, which, to be fair, I don't think Jag played the week particularly well, but I still feel like his lack of awareness over what was happening and his lack of a backbone really did him in here. So I feel like it's for all those reasons that I'm just kind of disappointed by Jag at this point. I think it's pretty clear that he had an opportunity to turn things around, only for that to not really materialize, and now he's probably going to go home. So because of that, I do have to leave him all the way at the bottom, here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have the two people that were initially on the block together, and two of the people that seemed to be the most likely targets coming into the week. However, I did decide to go with this person even though they weren't technically the target initially, but here we have Red, who is still on the block, and it does seem like he will probably stay. Although, I don't really give him a lot of credit for that, where I feel like this week he just continued to play pretty poorly for the most part, where first up you had the fact that Cam was throwing Red so hard under the bus when Red wasn't really reciprocating to the same degree, and while Cam was probably going to be the target over Red, I feel like Red was kind of behind the ball with that. Not to mention the whole trauma that resulted from them, where it seemed like Red was being accused of spreading rumors about America. That's not particularly great. But I think the single biggest moment to talk about from this week was when he promised Cam that he would use the veto on Cam if he had won it, which is pretty insane there. Not to mention that he actually seemed willing to go through with that promise, which is pretty bad, considering that Cam was trying to distance himself from Red at that point. And even after Cam won the veto and it seemed like he was going to stay up on the block, we still had people talking about potentially targeting Red, where Bowie was considered as the replacement nom in order to target Red. And even moving forward, while it does seem like Red's going to stay, I feel like he just has less potential in the game compared to Cameron. Where even though Cameron's a bigger target at this point, I feel like Cameron's slightly more likely to win his way further into the game through his comp ability. And plus, I feel like if they somehow got to the end together, I could see Cameron building a case for himself, or at least more of a case compared to Red. That also mixing in with Red's actively bad gameplay, not only from this past week, but from the previous week as well, and mixing that in with the fact that Red has shown more actively bad gameplay this week compared to Cameron, I feel like it was just enough to have Red below Cameron to where I do have him here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have someone that I literally just talked about, and here we have Cameron. And obviously, there's a lot to say about Cameron at this point. He's very much been at the center of controversy this week, where he has continued to act creepy. He has continued to say a lot of very misogynistic things regarding America to the point where it is now bordering on sexual harassment. And yet, despite this, CBS has felt the need to cover it up in order to protect Cameron, where obviously a lot of people are upset about all this. They feel like basically it's the world against America, and Cameron's probably the biggest instigator against that. And obviously all that's very bad. And at this point, I think Cameron's probably one of the biggest targets in the House, where he was obviously the target this week until he won the veto. And even moving forward, I feel like he'll continue to be a pretty big target in the future. He's actually gotten pretty lucky now that Red is probably going to stay this week over Jag, to where he'll still have that. Though even then, like, he's been throwing Red under the bus, and there's been this whole drama concerning Red. And obviously with the American situation, that's not great either. I feel like Cameron's someone that is pretty much going to have to rely on winning comps at this point if he wants to make it a deep run into the game. Which, to be fair, is not impossible considering that he is one of the bigger competitors left in the game. But considering like how like off-putting he's been strategically, how not great he's been in really every other aspect of the game, it's just not looking great for Cameron at this point, which is why he is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone that has continued to make no progress in the game, if you ask me. But here we have Bowie Jane, and Bowie is just there at this point, where she's not even really in the Cirrie core at this point. It's pretty much like her on her own, but kind of working with Cameron and Red. And she hasn't really played that actively at this point. I feel like really out of everyone left in the game, aside from possibly Cameron or Red, Bowie's the least likely person to win a jury vote. Not to mention the fact that she was very much in the conversation this week to be a replacement nom after the veto, not to be targeted, but to be a pawn to send out Red. But even then, the fact that she's even in that position to begin with sort of speaks to how expendable she is in the game. And she hasn't really done really anything to correct this to a degree. So I think all that's pretty bad. I feel like she has less potential in the future compared to Cameron and Red, but I feel like she's also someone that is probably less likely to be targeted immediately compared to those two, but still someone that I think is very unlikely to win the game, and because of that, she is here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and this person did jump up technically from last week quite a bit. However, I still find their game to be pretty mediocre, and here we have Blue, who was the bottom ranked person of the people still in the game at the time of recording last week, simply because it seemed like at the time she was going to be the target, and while that did move away to where she didn't get any votes against her, I still feel like she played this week mostly poorly, where early on she was sort of along the ride with Jag, where she was starting to wake up. She pretty much figured out that Cirrie is Jared's mom, which is something at least. And for a moment, it seemed like she was starting to wake up, where she was recognizing the need to pull in Jag and Matt, maybe pull in this coalition together to take them out, take out the Cirrie side. However, she very quickly drops it, and she very quickly becomes a background character where initially she wanted to keep Jag and really wanted to work to ensure he wasn't the target, but then very easily gives up when it's clear that Jag's a likely target, where she has that conversation with Jared, and Jared is talking about how he wants to put up Jag, and Blue doesn't really push back at all. You also have the meeting with the seven deadly sins where a lot of the Cirrie core is trying to basically get Jag to volunteer to go up on the block. Except it was Blue that initially pitched this idea, saying that Jag needed to volunteer himself, which is really bad. Where, yes, even though the writing was on the wall at that point, the fact that she was not really doing anything to push back against this is pretty bad. And while a lot of that is due to self preservation, I mean, Jared was the HOH, which should have been one of her best case scenarios in terms of not going up on the block. However, she does virtually nothing to act upon these initial plans to turn the game around. And I feel like at this point, she's kind of in a bad spot where she's going to lose Jag, one of her closest allies. And I feel like she doesn't really have much going on at this point. I think this week has continued to show that she's a mostly middling player and not someone that I have a lot of faith in moving forward. But again, compared to Bowie, Cameron, and Red, I feel like they have a bit more potential, though even then, I don't think that's saying too much. But it's enough to have her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone that is still in a pretty rocky position, though they have garnered a lot of sympathy from the fan base this past week. But here we have America. And obviously there's a lot to say about America and the way that she's been treated by a lot of the house guests this week. Obviously, you have the Cam situation that I touched upon earlier. That's not great. You have the fact that despite this terrible treatment, a lot of people still somehow think that Cam and America are this secret pair that needs to be broken up, which obviously isn't good for America's game either. You obviously have Jared and some of the things he has said regarding her, which we'll be touching upon soon. You even have people like an Izzy saying that she sort of sees America as someone that likes to gossip, which is not great. And in general, it seems like America's been a bit of a punching bag, both socially and strategically by a lot of the house, where she is still in a pretty bad spot. I mean, people are talking about targeting her. She was very much in the conversation of being a backdoor target this week. And even moving forward, you have a lot of the Cirrie core thinking about targeting her in the next couple of weeks, literally right after Cam and Red, due to this perception that America would target Cirrie and Izzy, which, to be fair, isn't entirely false, but the fact that they have picked up on that isn't great. Matt is also someone that's pretty mad at America and would target her relatively soon. And in a lot of ways, America losing Jag here is not great for her game either, as Jag is someone that she wanted to work with at one point, obviously, as she wanted to save Jag. But then with everything falling apart, it's just not going to work out that way. So, admittedly, America's still in a pretty rocky position where she's not the best player in the world, but really she's also the victim of some pretty unfair perceptions of her in the house. But with that said, the main reason I have her this high on the list is that despite her bad position, I think she still has a number of outs. She obviously has Cory fighting for her, and the fact that they're in a showmance is something that she could use. Just today, we had this conversation with Cory and Mimi, where it seems like that's becoming a more solidified relationship, and if that is something that becomes a game relationship, I think that's something that could really help America's game. And in general, I feel like America still has some outs, even if she's a pretty big target right now. But at the end of the day, I still feel like America is definitely going to have a long road ahead of her if she wants to actually win the game, which is why she's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and these two are relatively close, and I did think initially that this person would be above the other person, but after thinking about it some more, I feel like this person's overall position has deteriorated more rapidly than the other person, and here we have Felicia. And it's sort of weird seeing that Felicia's position has kind of weakened to this point, where on one hand, she is starting to recognize the game more. She is trying to play more individualistically at this point. She recognizes that she shouldn't be getting all the way to the end with the likes of Cirrie and Izzy, given that Cirrie and Izzy have a final 2 together. However, she's been doing it in a way that has gone back to those other players. And at this point, a lot of that core knows that Felicia has been trying to undercut them, and they in turn have been trying to undercut her as well. And plus, I feel like she slipped up in conversations and hasn't really done effective work this week, where first up, it was her that volunteered to make the pitch to Cam after the veto, where Cirrie wanted Cam to potentially use the veto on Red to send him out, only for her to not be very effective in that. Granted, it was a bit of an uphill battle anyway. But then you also have, when she was going over this plan, she ends up leaking the Legend 8 Alliance to Jag and Matt, which is pretty bad there. But even beyond that, you have a lot of this Cirrie core starting to undercut Felicia, Where first up, you have after the veto meeting, where Cirrie tells Red that Felicia wasn't on his side, which caused Red to think that Felicia was against him. You have later on the fact that Izzy was talking with Cory, and she says that after taking out Jag, Cam, and Red, that she's starting to think about going for Felicia much sooner than what she would have otherwise. And in general, I feel like the way Felicia has approached the game is not great. Where again, I do respect the intention of wanting to branch out and to do things more for herself, but she's been doing it in a way that's been really weakening her position within the Cirrie core to where I wouldn't be surprised if after a lot of these big targets go out that she'll be the first one out of the Cirrie core when that shot is taken. And it seems like a lot of the outsiders like Cory in America would be okay with that. So I feel like because of that, I can't really have Felicia too much higher than here. I feel like this game has not played out well for her this past week. And because of that, I do have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone that has also dropped in this past week, sort of similar to Felicia. However, I feel like this person is still kind of in a better position moving forward, and I feel like they still have some positives to overact some of their negatives. But here we have Matt, who has said some not great things in the last day or so, but again, I'll try to keep it focused on the game, where I do have to give Matt some credit, where he does decide to use the power. He actually hadn't even won the power at the time of last week's video, but he won the power, and while it seemed like he wasn't going to use it and was just going to let Jag go, he actually ends up using it to save Jag, and he's even able to get Cirrie's blessing to do so, which is able to keep trust on that side. So I do have to give Matt a lot of credit here for using the power to save his ally. However, I feel like the rest of the week didn't play out exactly according to plan, where during a lot of the week, he tried very hard to get America up on the block and was very unsuccessful in doing so. And even moving forward, a lot of that side recognizes that he is very anti-America, which I think could paint a target on his back if that side were to win HOH, someone like a Cory or an America, but we'll see how that goes. You also have the fact that he volunteered to go up on the block at one point, which is pretty bad. Mind you, he was very clearly not the target in that position, but still, it's like, why are you volunteering to go up on the block? What do you even gain from that? And I think aside from that, his ineffectiveness in getting his way this week between getting America on the block, and at this point he's just kind of letting Jag go, even though he had used the power the last week to save him. I feel like that's pretty bad as well. And I think similar to Felicia, he has been talked about as a potential target during the mid game, where again, during that conversation with Izzy and Cory, Izzy said that after the big targets go, that alongside Felicia, Matt should also go in that spot. And I feel like Matt's probably a bit more likely to be targeted in that spot, though I feel like it's a bit better than Felicia, who I feel like was practically locked for endgame until her gameplay from the past week accelerated her target. I feel like Matt was kind of in that position more early from an earlier point, but I still feel like Matt has a lot of potential to get out of that spot through him winning comps, and plus he still has a pretty good relationship with this Cirrie core to where I could see Matt potentially staying over Felicia. So I think those were enough to have her above Felicia, though I still feel like he is not necessarily in the best spot to win the game by the very end, and plus I feel like his gameplay from the past week was enough to knock him down to number 6. Now moving on to number 5, we have someone that I think their position has improved to a degree, though I still think their game is kind of flawed, and here we have Cory. And I think Cory's definitely in a better spot now than he was last week, where I feel like last week he was really being lumped in with America for a lot of the stuff she was doing, and it seemed like at a point that he could have been targeted relatively soon. However, at this point, it seems like the target on Cory's back has kind of gotten smaller to where it seems like he has a bit more runway to work with now. And plus, I feel like there are definitely some pros to his game. I feel like a big highlight from this past week was his relationship with Izzy, where it's pretty clear at this point that Izzy has a good relationship with him. Mind you, I think Cory trusts Izzy too much, and I think he shares too much information with Izzy that in turn gets back to Cirrie. However, I feel like Izzy does genuinely have a strong relationship with Cory that I think could give him some leverage in the future. You also have the fact that he's been working on Mimi a bit more, to where it does seem like Mimi's a bit more willing to work with Cory in the future. And while they haven't really solidified anything game-wise, I could very well see that coming together in the future. You also have the fact that Cory is someone that in a showmance with America and obviously has a solid ally there. And yes, while America's still a likely target, I think the fact that America wasn't the target herself this week is something that can help both of their games in the future. Now, with that said, I think there are plenty of knocks that you can attribute to him. Like I said, he does trust Izzy a little too much, though I think he's been getting a little better at sharing that information. You also have the fact that he was getting into arguments with Jared this past week, to where it did seem like at a point that Jared was kind of getting fed up with Cory, though it does seem like they still have a somewhat decent relationship, and it doesn't seem like Jared will target Cory over certain other people, so I think there's that to consider. You also have the fact that he hasn't been playing the showmance particularly well, where for a lot of the week, it did seem like he was trying to distance himself from America as a way to avoid them being targeted together, which did kind of blow up in his face when it did seem like America was still going to be targeted anyway. And when he tried to dispel certain things about America, it made it harder for him to really have credibility in those discussions, as he would claim that he's not that close to her. So I think that's also kind of a knock as well. But I think the biggest thing that is holding back Cory's game right now is that people have been talking more about the fact that he's been throwing comps. And admittedly, Cory has been throwing comps, but I think that is something that is harmed his game in two ways. One is that he's not actually winning comps to begin with and sort of denying himself opportunities to build a power structure, where he had a very clear opportunity this week to get one of his own allies or possibly himself to win HOH to ensure that people like a Jag stick around, as obviously losing Jag is not ideal for Cory at this point. But I feel like moving forward, like it begs this question of, okay, if he's going to stop throwing comps at some point, will he even have an opportunity to win them before it's too late? Like at the point where he has lost all of his allies. So I think while it made a little bit of sense at the beginning of the game, I think this is now the point where Cory should be seriously considering winning some of these comps. But even beyond that, the perception, the fact that people are clocking the fact that Cory has been throwing comps is making him come off as a less reliable ally, as it makes it seem like he's not really like doing his part to help the team win power. And at worst, it makes it seem like he's just saving it up to allow someone else to take a shot against them, when, to make him seem like he's having his hands clean. So I think those are all things holding back Cory's game, but I still feel like he's in a better spot than he was last week, and I still think there are some outs for him moving forward. But I feel like with him losing a number this week, and with him having pitfalls in the future, I can't really have them any higher than number 5. And I'm moving on to number 4, and I didn't think this person would be this high. However, I think this person is in an interesting position at this point and has an interesting opportunity presented before them. But here we have Mimi. And again, Mimi's largely been on the down low, hasn't really been playing super actively. However, she has been coming around in the last week, where I think the big development with her is that her and Cory have been getting along a bit more, and it seems like they've been bonding a lot. Mind you, they're not really talking a lot of game, but it seems like Mimi's overall relationship in view of Cory has improved from the early weeks. Where one of my big complaints against Mimi was the fact that despite Cory being so open to working with Mimi, Mimi herself just didn't really care and made it very clear that she didn't care, to the point where Cory sort of distanced himself from her. But now it seems like they're kind of rekindling that. And I think Mimi's a bit more open to allowing Cory into her game. Now we'll have to see whether this truly pans out and whether they'll even have the opportunity to enact some of these things. But I think Mimi's in an interesting spot at this point, where I feel like unlike the likes of Felicia or Matt, I feel like Mimi's not going to be targeted anytime soon. I feel like she has plenty of safety to work with. And plus, you have people like Cory in America that are willing to play the game more at this point. And if she ends up aligning with these people, she could have Cory in America taking these shots against the Cirrie side while keeping her hands clean and still having them being bigger targets ahead of her. And I feel like if she's able to do that, she'll be in a fantastic spot to take out a lot of these big threats and pave herself a path to potentially win the game. It's just a question of whether she'll actually take it. Now, I'm sure some people will say that she probably won't take it given how passive she's been up to this point, but I think we've seen through her like gameplay and her like talks about the game that there is a chance that she could take this opportunity, and if she does, I think she'll definitely improve to such a great degree. So I think it's a mixture of that, plus I feel like other people have bigger flaws in her that I did decide to put Mimi above them, though I feel like for now I can't really have her above number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we essentially have the Cirrie core left to talk about, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 3, we do have Izzy, and I'm a bit surprised Izzy has gotten this high on the list, but I feel like considering the position that her core is in, it kind of makes sense. Now, I still feel like Izzy's probably the one that's going to be left out of all this, and plus, I think it's become increasingly clear that Izzy herself is not really playing to win. She's playing more so to allow Cirrie to win pretty much. I guess Jared too, but still, like, it's not great that she's not playing for herself to win, but I still feel like she's in a strong position. And plus, I feel like she's still not going to be the most likely targeted soon. Where at this point, I feel like with Felicia putting a bigger target on her back, I feel like that's going to lead to Felicia being taken out over Izzy when that shot gets taken. I feel like you also have to consider her relationship with Cory, to where I feel like Corey's someone that would want to go deep in the game with her, but it's just more so worried about the fact that Izzy is so blatantly close with Cirrie. So I think that's a big factor. But otherwise, like Corey's still trusting her with a lot of information, which I think is pretty good there. I think at this point, like Izzy and her alliance is pretty set up to make a deep run. But I feel like with her lack of desire to play the game, not to mention that the top two have a pretty clear final two, I feel like I had to leave Izzy here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and people are not going to be happy with this placement, as I didn't really want to put this person this high either. However, I feel like with the way the game's playing out, I feel like this person's pretty destined to make a deep run at this point. But at number 2, we do have Jared, and I get it. People don't like Jared at this point, and there's a lot that can be said about him, where he has literally broken rules this week and has pretty much gone away with it. Where first up, you have him violating the hate speech rule by calling America the R word, and there was a lot of calls for him to be removed from the game because of that in order to be consistent, but ultimately production did pretty much nothing about that, so that's not great. But then even further, you have him using production as a strategy, where he was telling Izzy and Cirrie that he wants to target America based on the vibe that he got from his DR questions, which is also against the rules, and production once again did not step in to stop Jared from doing that. Like, you can't do that. So I think for a lot of reasons, people don't like Jared. They already were not liking Jared very much based on stuff from previous weeks, but I think this week ultimately solidified that even further. Not to mention the fact that he won HOH in a knockout comp where he wasn't even picked until the final 3, where he literally only had to answer one question correctly, and then the last question he got because Izzy got it wrong. So in a lot of ways, he didn't really do much to win this HOH. He didn't really show himself to be much of a competitor there. So I feel like through a lot of that, people don't like Jared. Like, they think he's just being handed everything on a silver platter, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But that doesn't change the fact that he is being handed the game on a silver platter, where he does win HOH. His side does gain a lot of power this week. They are able to take out Jack, even though for a lot of the week he wanted to take out America, but he basically acquiesced to what his alliance wanted to do. And I feel like moving forward, yes, while he hasn't done a lot of great things, like him getting to fights with Cory, he is still not really being targeted by a lot of the house. And I think at this point, with Cirrie fighting so hard to keep him around for obvious reasons, I think it's just setting Jared up in a very strong position. Now, yes, he doesn't really do much to earn that. And I think the season has shown that he's not really a good player across really any facet of the game. But I feel like with the obstacles that so many of the other players have to face in order to get into a better position, I feel like I can't really ignore where Jared is at this point, where it's just going to be very easy for him to hold on to power, where as long as he has his mom around, I feel like that's really going to help him out. So as much as I don't like him at this point, I do have to acknowledge that he's in a very solid spot to win the game, and because of that, he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 25 is still Cirrie. And kind of like Jared, I know some people will probably be a little annoyed by this, especially given that Cirrie herself has not played particularly optimally, where she does decide to save Jack. She gives Matt permission to save him in a spot where it doesn't really benefit her to keep Jag at this point. And I feel like this week there was just many opportunities for it to backfire, where we saw the day after the eviction that Jag, Blue, and Matt were starting to compare notes, saying that the Cirrie side was starting to dominate things. And it did seem for a moment that her position was starting to be challenged. However, then we just as easily see the miss return, and we see like Jag sort of coming back around and sort of apologizing for a lot of his actions during this past week. And he even goes as far as to do more alliances with her, one with like them and Matt, and then one where they add in Red for whatever reason, all to take out Jag again. It's just crazy that they just gave up that easily, and there's not really much of a resistance moving forward, where Blue is just fine with letting Jag go. Even Matt has his eyes set more on America than anything else, and once Jag ends up on the block, he seems just kind of fine letting him go. So I feel like that's not particularly great. So I still feel like Cirie's not playing the perfect game, and I still feel like there are people that are recognizing the position that she's in, like people like in America, people like a Cory, obviously, that would take shots at that side later on in the game. But I still feel like this week has further demonstrated her stranglehold on the game. The fact that it's just going to be very hard to take out Cirrie when that shot is eventually taken. So I know people aren't going to like it, but I still had to put Cirrie at number one simply because she has been in the best position in the house. And I feel like with the way the game's playing out at this point, she's probably the most likely to win the game. So it's for all those reasons that I have her here at number one. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so stay tuned for that. I will be live streaming the live show on Thursday night, so you can check me out there on YouTube. I also have a Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can click the link in the description. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.